Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so hauntingly real, that it felt like it was pulling you into a world not meant for the living? For me, it began with the sound of laughter, not the warm, joyous kind, but a hollow, echoing laughter that felt trapped, reverberating in a space outside of time. My name is Elias Trenholm, and I've spent my life chasing the unexplained. From cursed artifacts to abandoned towns with dark histories, I've unraveled countless mysteries that others feared to touch. But nothing, not even the darkest of those tales, could prepare me for what I'm about to share. This isn't just another story, it's a warning, one you might wish you had never heard. It all started with a dream, or at least what I thought was a dream. There was a playground shrouded in fog, its jagged silhouette crumbling under the weight of forgotten years. The swings swayed slowly, creaking in rhythm with an invisible wind, while laughter, a child's laughter, grew louder, closer, yet remained eerily disembodied. In the heart of the playground stood a carousel, its once vivid colors peeling and fading into splintered wood. The laughter transformed, becoming a chilling melody that seemed to mock my presence. And then I saw it. A teddy bear lay abandoned at the edge of the carousel, its button eyes dull and lifeless, staring into an abyss I couldn't see. A whisper inside me, faint yet insistent, urged, "Turn back now." But curiosity, or perhaps something far darker, pulled me forward. That dream was more than just a haunting vision. It was an invitation, a key to a nightmare that would soon seep into every corner of my waking life. If you dare to follow this story to its chilling conclusion, I promise it will change the way you see the world around you. But before we plunge into the shadows of this tale, I need you to do one thing. Subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. These aren't just stories for the faint of heart. They're journeys into the unknown for those unafraid to confront the terrors lurking at the edges of our reality. Now brace yourself as we return to where it all began. The night that shattered my understanding of dreams, fear, and the fragile boundary between life and whatever lies beyond. It began on an otherwise uneventful night. The kind of night when silence feels heavier, wrapping around you like a thick blanket, and the stillness of the world becomes almost oppressive. I drifted into sleep without fanfare, but what awaited me was far from ordinary. In the dream, I found myself standing in a place I didn't recognize, yet it felt uncomfortably familiar, like a memory buried so deep it had been eroded by time. It was a playground, but not one that echoed with laughter or joy. This was a place of abandonment and despair, swallowed by an unnatural fog that clung to everything like a suffocating shroud. The air was heavy with a metallic tang, sharp and acrid, tinged with an unsettling sweetness that made my stomach churn. Each step I took felt amplified, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet reverberating like thunder in the unnatural stillness. Then came the sound, faint at first but unmistakable, laughter. Not the innocent kind of children at play, but distorted, hollow, as though it echoed from a great distance, or from within the fog itself. I froze, scanning the playground. The swings creaked softly, their chains swaying as if someone had just left them. A rusty merry-go-round spun lazily, the groaning of its joints a jarring counterpoint to the eerie silence. I ventured deeper into the fog, my unease growing with every step. Scattered across the ground were forgotten toys, a doll missing an arm, a battered toy truck, a kite ensnared in the lifeless branches of a tree. Each seemed abandoned mid-play, like relics of a world suddenly and inexplicably emptied. The laughter grew louder, warping into something jagged and sinister, like an old record played on a broken gramophone. I turned, searching for the source, but the fog twisted around me, thickening into a labyrinth of shadows and shifting shapes. A wave of déjà vu struck me then, powerful and disorienting. I had been here before, or had I? My heart pounded as I realized I couldn't recall waking up that morning. The lines between dream and reality blurred, and with them came the crushing weight of the place itself, as if it were alive and watching me. In the distance I saw movement. A shadow flitted through the fog, darting between the skeletal remains of a slide and the rusted skeleton of monkey bars. It was small, fleeting, and impossible to identify. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to move, as if the playground itself had claimed me as part of its desolation. And then, from somewhere in the mist, a voice broke the suffocating silence. It was a child's voice, soft, playful, but carrying an icy edge that sent a shiver down my spine. It whispered, "Why did you leave us?" The words echoed endlessly, bouncing off unseen walls, growing louder until they became unbearable. My chest tightened, and I tried to answer, but no sound came. The shadow appeared again, closer this time, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of gravel, footsteps, impossibly light yet deliberate, drawing nearer with each passing second. I wanted to believe it was just a dream, but the vividness of it, the cold biting my skin, the metallic taste in the air, the crushing sense of dread, was far too real. The fog coiled tighter around me, a living entity that seemed intent on holding me there. This wasn't just a dream. It was something else entirely, an invitation, a trap, or perhaps a warning. Whatever resided here didn't want me to leave, and waking up would be far more difficult than I imagined. The playground stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of rusted metal and decayed wood, cloaked in a fog that seemed alive. As I ventured deeper, a suffocating sense of dread settled over me, like unseen eyes boring into the back of my head. The laughter had faded now, replaced by an oppressive silence that swallowed even the sound of my footsteps. But the silence wasn't empty. It carried weight, as if the air itself was watching, waiting. I moved cautiously toward the merry-go-round, its rusted frame glinting faintly in the dim light. A faint hum vibrated through the air, low and almost imperceptible, like the distant toll of a bell. As I reached out to touch the cold metal, it began to spin. Slowly at first, creaking and groaning, before picking up speed. There was no wind, no visible force, yet the carousel moved with deliberate purpose. My breath hitched as I noticed the toys I'd seen earlier, scattered dolls, trucks, and stuffed animals, now arranged neatly around its base. They hadn't been there before. A shadow darted across my peripheral vision, low to the ground and impossibly fast. My heart pounded as I turned, scanning the fog for movement. Then came a sound, soft, rhythmic, and chilling, a faint tap-tap-tap, like small feet skipping across gravel. It grew louder, circling me, but no figure emerged. The sensation of being watched intensified, an unbearable weight pressing down on my chest. Objects began shifting around me. A slide that had been to my left now loomed behind me, its rusted frame dripping with what looked like water, or something thicker. Swings creaked softly, moving in opposite directions, as if invisible children were playing on them. My pulse raced as I glanced down, and realized the ground beneath my feet was shifting too. The gravel seemed to ripple like water, and with each step the texture changed, from sharp stones to something soft and damp, almost fleshy. Then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the fog. Small, no taller than a child, but its outline was wrong, distorted, as if viewed through cracked glass. It stood motionless, watching. My throat tightened as I tried to speak, but no words came. The figure tilted its head unnaturally, and suddenly the laughter returned. Not distant and faint as before, but all around me, deafening and fractured, like a chorus of broken voices overlapping in an unholy symphony. Desperation clawed at me, urging me to move, but my legs felt heavy, as though the ground was gripping them. I forced myself to turn toward the carousel again, now spinning wildly. A single beam of light emerged from its center, piercing through the fog and illuminating a door I hadn't noticed before. It stood alone, unattached to any structure, its wooden surface weathered and cracked. From behind the door came a faint glow, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. My curiosity battled with the primal fear surging through me. Every instinct screamed to stay away, yet I felt an invisible force pulling me forward. I reached out, my hand trembling, as the laughter grew impossibly loud, morphing into anguished cries. As my fingers touched the door, it creaked open, revealing a darkness so absolute it seemed to devour the light. Something stirred within the void, a presence, vast and malevolent. My entire body froze as I realized I wasn't looking into an empty space. Countless pairs of hollow eyes stared back at me, unblinking and filled with an unspeakable hunger. The door began to pull me in, and for the first time, I felt a force far stronger than fear, regret. I tried to pull away, but the air itself seemed to hold me in place. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the shadow of the small figure stepping closer, its form becoming clearer, and far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, so complete and overwhelming that it felt as though the world had ceased to exist. Then a low, guttural hum began to grow, vibrating through my very bones. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. Shapes began to form, faint outlines that flickered like the edges of a flame. My breath hitched as I realized what I was seeing. Rows of children standing in perfect silence, their faces obscured by the shifting shadows around them. At the center of this abyss stood a single figure, distinct from the others. It was small, no taller than a child, but its presence radiated something ancient and incomprehensible. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, as if studying me. Then it took a step forward, and the shadows clinging to its form peeled away. My stomach dropped. The figure was no child. Its face was a grotesque mask, a patchwork of hollow features stitched together with thin, glistening threads. Where its eyes should have been were deep, bottomless voids that seemed to pull me in, promising nothing but despair. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body refused to obey. My limbs felt as though they were submerged in thick, icy water. The figure raised an arm, impossibly long and skeletal, pointing toward the ground in front of me. I forced myself to look down and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small toy, a teddy bear with a missing eye. Its worn fur was matted with something dark, something that shimmered faintly under the dim, flickering light. As I stared at the toy, a voice broke the silence, a whisper, yet it echoed as though spoken by 1,000 voices at once. "Find us." The words sent a chill racing through me, each syllable laced with a sorrow, so profound it felt like it could crush me. The figure moved closer, and with each step, the children surrounding it began to sway in unison, as if caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me shifted violently. The floor cracked and splintered, revealing a swirling abyss below, filled with faintly glowing shapes. I realized with horror that they were toys, thousands of them, floating in the churning void like debris caught in a current. The whisper returned, louder this time, almost desperate. "Find us." The figure pointed again, and I understood. The teddy bear was the key, a piece of a puzzle I was now unwillingly a part of. I bent down to pick it up, my hand trembling as I reached for its matted fur. The moment my fingers brushed the toy, the scene around me erupted in chaos. The children screamed in unison, a high-pitched, piercing wail that made my vision blur. The figure lunged toward me, its hollow eyes burning with rage. The floor gave way completely, and I felt myself falling into the abyss of toys, their edges sharp and cold against my skin as I tumbled deeper and deeper. As I fell, flashes of images burned into my mind. Children laughing, then crying, then screaming. An old carousel spinning endlessly in the fog. A woman's voice calling out a name I didn't recognize. The final image was of a door, the same door I had opened before the darkness claimed me. But this time, it was chained shut, with a single word scrawled across it in jagged letters. Why? I woke up with a jolt, gasping for air as though I had been drowning. My room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of my alarm clock. I could still feel the cold weight of the teddy bear in my hand, but when I looked down, it was gone. The laughter lingered in my ears, faint but unmistakable, like an echo trapped just beyond the edges of my perception. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, but deep down I knew the truth. Whatever I had seen, whatever I had touched, it was far from over. The morning after the dream, I woke up drenched in sweat, my body trembling as though it had been racked by fever. My mind clung to the fragments of the nightmare, those hollow eyes, the spinning carousel, the ominous whispers. But what truly terrified me was the lingering sensation in my hand, the phantom weight of the teddy bear I had picked up in that dark abyss. It felt real, too real, and no amount of reasoning could shake the thought that it had followed me back from the dream. As the day wore on, the memories gnawed at me, refusing to fade like an ordinary nightmare. Instead, they sharpened, gaining clarity with every passing hour. The details of the playground, the fog, and even the arrangement of the scattered toys felt vivid enough to sketch. Unable to focus, I sat at my desk and typed a description of the dream into a search engine. I wasn't expecting anything, maybe a vague connection to some psychological phenomenon. But what appeared made my heart stop cold. A headline from a decades-old news article stared back at me. "The Vanishing Children of Hollow Creek Playground." Beneath it, a faded black and white photo showed the exact playground I had seen in my dream. The rusted swing set, the broken carousel, even the skeletal trees that surrounded it. My hands shook as I clicked on the link, my breath catching in my throat as I read the chilling story. In the late 1970s, the playground had been the site of a series of disappearances. 5 children had vanished without a trace over the span of a single summer, leaving behind only their toys, eerily arranged as though someone, or something, had placed them there intentionally. The article detailed the fruitless search efforts, the distraught parents, and the growing fear that something sinister haunted the area. But what truly froze me was the description of the last child to go missing, a little boy named Jacob, whose favorite toy was a teddy bear with a missing eye. I couldn't ignore the connection. The bear in my dream, the exact one I had picked up, was the same as Jacob's. It was impossible, absurd, and yet the truth felt undeniable. Desperate for more answers, I scoured every resource I could find, digging through online forums, archived news articles, and local legends. The more I uncovered, the darker the story became. Witnesses had claimed to hear laughter coming from the playground at night, long after it had been abandoned. Others reported seeing shadows moving through the fog, shapes that didn't belong to anything human. One forum post stood out among the others, written by someone who claimed to have visited the site years after the disappearances. They described an overwhelming sense of being watched, an unnatural silence that made even the bravest souls turn back. At the bottom of their post was a chilling warning: the playground doesn't let you leave empty-handed. If you take something, it takes something back. That sentence clung to me like a curse. I thought of the bear, of the unbearable weight in my hand when I woke up. Had I taken something from that place? Or had it taken something from me? The thought filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. But what came next was even worse. Later that evening, I noticed something unusual in my apartment. On my coffee table, among the clutter of notebooks and pens, was a single item that hadn't been there before. A small, worn teddy bear with a missing eye. My heart nearly stopped. It couldn't be real. I had left it in the dream, hadn't I? But there it was, sitting silently, its button eye glinting faintly in the dim light. The air in the room seemed to grow colder as I approached it, my mind screaming at me to leave, to run. But something compelled me forward. When I finally picked it up, the laughter returned, faint but unmistakable, echoing from nowhere and everywhere all at once. This was no ordinary dream, no figment of my imagination. Whatever I had seen in that playground wasn't just haunting my mind. It had crossed the boundary into my reality, and it wasn't done with me yet. As I stepped onto the gravel path, the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the sound of crunching gravel beneath my boots echoed unnaturally, as though the playground were amplifying every noise to announce my arrival. The laughter began again, faint and distant, but unmistakable. It circled me, bouncing off unseen walls of fog. I swung the flashlight toward the source, but there was nothing, only the faint glint of the swing chains moving in an unseen breeze. That's when I saw him, an old man sitting on a bench near the edge of the playground, his figure barely discernible through the mist. His head was bowed, and his shoulders slumped, as though the weight of the world rested on him. Against all logic, I approached. He didn't move until I was only a few feet away, and then he lifted his head. His eyes were hollow, sunken, and his face was lined with an expression of profound sorrow. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice raspy, almost a whisper. "Once it notices you, it never lets go." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice trembled. "My name doesn't matter," he replied, his gaze fixed on the carousel. "But I lost someone here. My grandson. He was one of the first to disappear. I've been coming back ever since, hoping to find him. Or maybe hoping it finally takes me too." He gestured toward the playground, his hand shaking. "They're still here, you know. The children. They never left. And neither will you." His words sent a chill through me. I wanted to demand answers, to understand what was happening. But before I could speak, he stood abruptly and began to walk away, disappearing into the fog as if he had never been there at all. I was alone again, but the playground didn't feel empty. It felt alive. The carousel creaked behind me, its rusted frame spinning slowly despite the stillness of the air. I turned and froze. Standing next to it was a small figure, no more than a child. It wore tattered clothing, its back turned to me. My heart thundered in my chest as I took a step closer. The figure didn't move. Then in one fluid motion it turned to face me. Its face was pale and featureless, with empty, hollow eyes that seemed to suck the light from the air. A voice echoed in my head, though the figure's mouth never moved. "Why did you leave us?" The words were filled with sorrow and anger, a weight that crushed my chest. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering as the fog thickened around me. More shapes began to emerge, children with the same blank faces, standing in silent rows watching me. I backed away, my breathing ragged, but the ground beneath me shifted. My foot struck something hard, and I looked down to see the teddy bear again, sitting upright on the gravel. Its missing eye seemed to glare at me accusingly. I bent to pick it up, compelled by some unseen force, and as my fingers brushed its fur, the laughter returned. Louder now, deafening, a cacophony of broken voices that filled the air and my mind. The children began to move, stepping closer in perfect unison, their hollow eyes locked on me. Panic surged through me as I clutched the bear, feeling its unnatural weight in my hand. The carousel spun faster, its lights flickering wildly, and the fog began to close in, suffocating and absolute. I had come searching for answers, but now, standing in the heart of the nightmare, I realized the truth. I wasn't just a visitor to this place. I was a part of it, and it wasn't done with me yet. The laughter reached a deafening crescendo, piercing and layered, as if countless voices were crying out from the void. The fog around me thickened into a suffocating wall, and the children closed in, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim, unnatural light. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by a force I couldn't see but could feel pressing down on me, making each breath harder to draw. My fingers clutched the teddy bear tighter, its coarse fur damp and sticky, though I dared not look down to see with what. In the midst of the chaos, the carousel spun wildly, its rusty creaks now a maddening metallic screech. The lights blinked erratically, casting shadows that danced across the faces of the children, twisting their blank features into grotesque masks. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise ceased. A silence heavier than death fell over the playground, and the children stopped moving, frozen in place like statues. Their heads tilted in unison, their gaze fixed on something behind me. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned, the weight of the air growing unbearable. At the heart of the playground, where the fog seemed to part like a curtain, stood the door. It was the same door I had seen in my dream, weathered and cracked, its surface etched with strange, pulsating symbols. This time, however, it wasn't alone. Standing before it was the figure from my dream, the childlike silhouette, its body shrouded in shadow, but its hollow, void-like eyes burning brighter than ever. The figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing at the door. The symbols on the wood glowed brighter, their patterns writhing like living things. A voice filled the air, not spoken but felt deep in my mind, reverberating through my skull like a sinister melody. Enter and know the truth, or leave and carry the weight forever. The voice was ancient, layered with the cries of countless others, their pain and longing etched into every word. I hesitated, my mind racing. Enter the door? Everything in me screamed against it. I knew this wasn't just a choice, it was a trap. Yet the pull of the place, the need to understand, to find closure, was overwhelming. I glanced at the children, now motionless and silent, their empty faces devoid of judgment or pity. But their presence was a reminder. They hadn't chosen to stay. They had been taken. With a trembling hand, I stepped toward the door. The teddy bear in my grip seemed to grow heavier, its weight anchoring me to the reality I was leaving behind. As I reached for the handle, the figure stepped aside, its eyeless gaze never leaving me. The air around the door was cold, impossibly cold, and the moment my fingers touched the handle, the symbols erupted in light, flooding the playground in a sickly, otherworldly glow. I opened the door, and a wave of darkness surged out, engulfing everything in its path. The children dissolved into the fog, their forms unraveling like threads of smoke. The playground vanished, replaced by an endless void of shifting shadows. I stepped through, drawn into the darkness, the laughter returning, softer now, almost mournful. Shapes began to emerge in the void, figures caught in suspended animation. Children, hundreds of them, frozen mid-laughter or mid-cry, their faces twisted in eternal fear or sadness. At the center of the void was an altar, crude and ancient, carved from blackened stone. Upon it rested an artifact, a small box covered in the same writhing symbols as the door. The figure appeared beside me, its skeletal hand gesturing toward the box. The voice filled my mind again, sharp and commanding. Take it. You must carry the truth. My hand moved on its own, reaching for the box. The moment I touched it, pain shot through me, searing and unbearable, as memories that weren't my own flooded my mind. I saw the children's final moments, their terror as they were pulled into this place, their cries for help unanswered. I saw the origins of the playground, a site cursed by an ancient ritual that demanded sacrifices to feed the void. And then I saw myself, standing where they had stood, my face twisted in horror as the shadows claimed me. I dropped the box, gasping for air, but it was too late. The void began to collapse, the shadows converging upon me. The figure's voice returned, softer now, almost kind. You carry the weight now. You belong to us. As the darkness swallowed me, I felt a sharp pull, and suddenly I was back. I woke up in the hospital, drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. The doctors said I had been found unconscious near Hollow Creek, but they couldn't explain how I had gotten there, or how I was still alive. I tried to convince myself it was over, that it had been a dream, a hallucination. But in my bag, I found it. The teddy bear, its missing eye staring back at me. And etched into my palm, faint but unmistakable, was one of the glowing symbols from the door. The playground hadn't let me go. It had marked me, and somewhere in the shadows, I knew it was waiting for me to return. I left the hospital feeling disoriented, my mind a blur of fragmented memories and unanswered questions. The doctor said I'd been found in the early hours of the morning, lying in the middle of Hollow Creek playground, unresponsive but unharmed. Yet, as I retraced those last few moments before everything went black, the truth seemed far more sinister. Something had happened, something the waking world refused to explain. Back in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the walls, flickering faintly even when the lights were steady. The air felt heavier, and the quiet hum of the city beyond my windows now seemed distant, muffled, as if I had crossed into some liminal space where the real world could no longer fully reach me. And then I saw it. The teddy bear, the same one from my dream in the playground, was sitting on my desk. Its missing eye seemed to watch me, and its threadbare fur now carried the faint scent of rust and damp earth. I knew I hadn't brought it home from the hospital. It had simply appeared. Alongside it, a single piece of paper lay unfolded. The words written in shaky, childlike handwriting made my blood run cold. You opened the door. Now it can't be closed. Panic surged through me as I grabbed the paper, intending to tear it to shreds, but my hands froze. The edges of the paper were warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, like something alive. I dropped it, and it fluttered to the ground. Before I could move, a faint laugh echoed from the hallway, soft and playful, yet carrying a sinister undercurrent that froze me in place. I swung the door open, expecting to find nothing but darkness, but there, at the far end of the hall, stood the shadowy figure from the playground. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It simply stared, its hollow eyes burning like dying embers. My chest tightened, my heart beat a deafening drumbeat in my ears. I blinked, and it was gone. The hallway was empty, but the laughter remained, fading into the distance like the memory of a bad dream. Days passed, but the occurrences only grew more intense. The teddy bear would appear in different parts of my apartment, always watching, always waiting. Shadows moved on their own, stretching and twisting into shapes that defied logic. The laughter grew louder, and at night, I'd wake to the sound of whispers coming from the corners of my room. At first, they were indistinct, but soon, I began to understand them. Find us, bring us back. It's not over. I couldn't ignore the message. The playground, the door, the children, they weren't done with me. Desperation drove me to research deeper into Hollow Creek, scouring old newspapers and obscure forums for any mention of the disappearances. That's when I found it, an old journal belonging to a local woman, now long deceased. She had written extensively about the playground, claiming it was built over the site of a ritual sacrifice meant to appease a force she called the Hollow One. According to her, the ritual had been disrupted, leaving the entity incomplete and starving for more souls to sustain it. One entry caught my eye. The door is a gateway, but it's also a trap. Those who open it become part of the hunger. They carry the burden until the debt is paid. My stomach churned as I realized the truth. I had been marked, and now I was part of something far bigger and darker than I could ever have imagined. But it wasn't just me. The children, the ones who had disappeared decades ago, were still trapped somewhere beyond that door. They weren't just victims, they were bait, luring others to repeat the cycle. And now, I was their link to the waking world. The thought filled me with dread, but also a grim determination. If I didn't act, I would be consumed just like them. The final straw came one night when I woke to find the teddy bear sitting at the foot of my bed. Its one button eye glinted in the moonlight, and in its lap lay the same slip of paper, with new words scrawled beneath the original message. Return, or they will come for you. I don't know how this story will end. The playground still calls to me, its laughter echoing faintly in my dreams, and its shadows creeping ever closer in my waking hours. I've packed a bag, preparing to return to Hollow Creek for one last confrontation. If you're watching this, it means I've made it back, at least long enough to share my story. But there's one thing I need to warn you about. If you ever hear laughter when no one else is around, or find a door that seems out of place, don't open it. No matter how strong the pull, no matter how tempting the mystery, walk away. Because once you open that door, you can never truly close it. If you have any theories about what's happening, leave them in the comments. Do you think I can free the children? Or will I become one of them? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. It might be the only way I can keep the truth alive. And remember, the nightmares don't always end when you wake up. Sometimes they're just beginning.